Arthritis is getting more and more common. In fact, most people will get arthritis at some point in their life. What's alarming, though, is that even after being diagnosed, 1 in 5 people don't know which of the two types of arthritis they actually have. And understanding the difference changes everything, including what to eat, because the two types are not the same disease. They look similar on the surface, they both hurt, they both swell, but the engine driving each one is completely different. And the foods that make one worse often make the other worse too, but through completely separate roads. The word arthritis means arthos, which is joint, and itis, which is inflammation, so an inflamed joint, and there are two main types. The most aggressive is called rheumatoid arthritis, often abbreviated RA, and it is a state of very high-intensity burning inflammation. It is acute, it is systemic, and most importantly, it is driven by your immune system attacking you. Your immune system creates different inflammatory messengers called tumor necrosis factor alpha, interleukin-1, interleukin-6, to signal the rest of the body that something is wrong. We sometimes call that a cytokine storm, a signaling storm, and it is not just a little inflammation, it is the immune system misidentifying the lining of your own joints as an invader and attacking it. So if we take a look at this joint, you can see the surrounding layer is called the capsule, and inside is what's called synovial fluid. That is the fluid that disperses nutrients inside, because cartilage does not have its own blood supply. But you can see how inflamed and angry that inside lining becomes in rheumatoid arthritis, and RA is what we call an erosive arthritis, which means over time it actively erodes the bone ends and the cartilage that sit inside that capsule. And one of the classic signs that rheumatologists look for is the breakdown of bone in the hand, where the fingers start to drift off toward the pinky side. This is called ulnar deviation, where the fingers veer outward because the joint is being eaten away underneath. And what's critical for the purpose of this video is how RA is treated. It is treated with immune suppression, meaning if your immune system is attacking you, the logic is to suppress your immune system so it does not have as much energy to attack you, which works, to a degree. It calms the symptoms, but it also lowers your overall immune competence. You have that immune system for good reasons. The other kind, way more common, is called osteoarthritis, abbreviated OA, and this is similar in that it has inflammation, but it is driven by poor metabolic health. The inflammation is low-grade, chronic, and local. It is not as widespread and systemic as it is with the rheumatoid. So poor metabolic health, also known as insulin resistance, drives up your blood sugar, and when you have more sugar floating in the bloodstream and it combines with proteins in your body, that is called glycation. And these damaged sugar-protein complexes are called advanced glycation end products, AGs. They do all sorts of damage in the body, but when it comes to joints and cartilage specifically, they stiffen and degrade cartilage and weaken it. And then we combine that with uneven wear and tear from poor posture or uncorrected imbalances, and now what happens is we get more breakdown than we get rebuilding, because your joints are not like a pair of shoes you were born with that you wear out over a lifetime. They are constantly remodeling, they are breaking down and being rebuilt at the same time. In a healthy person that keeps up, we always have healthy joints, but when these problems start setting in that we are talking about now, the breakdown outruns the rebuilding. When the cartilage thins out, the body does something to compensate. It starts building extra chunks of bone at the margin of the joint. So in an osteoarthritic knee, you can see in the middle the disc thin out, and when it wears away completely we can have bone on bone. That is when people get a knee replacement, but what you see at the edges is the body depositing extra pieces of bone, these little nodules that look like little pearl formations along the joint margin. Another common place we see this is in the hand, where you see a thickening of the knuckles, almost like a rounding to them, and on some of them you can see these little nodules up at the distal end of the joint. Now osteoarthritis is treated with regular systemic anti-inflammatories, things like ibuprofen and naproxen. These can be pretty harsh on your digestive tract over time, but they do calm the swelling. So, here is why food matters. Because rheumatoid arthritis is autoimmune in origin, and osteoarthritis is metabolic in origin, but they are both inflammatory, just at very different levels, and the foods that we choose to eat can either fuel that fire or calm it down. And we need to understand why that is often better than medication alone, because medication addresses symptoms only, not the root cause. So medications are good in the sense that they can help you feel comfortable while you combat this, while you change some things. But if you only take the medication and do not change what is going in your mouth, you are allowing the disease to progress under the surface and get worse. So I am going to walk you through 3 different groups of foods. The first one is called the sugar and refined carb group. We start off with number 1, sugar and high fructose corn syrup. And when we eat these foods, they are very simple carbohydrates. They hit the bloodstream fast. We get blood sugar spikes. And what happens in rheumatoid arthritis is these blood sugar spikes will drive those inflammatory messengers, those cytokines, and we will increase our risk of arthritic flare-ups. So every soda, every pastry, every candy that drives your blood sugar up is also feeding the cytokine storm upstream. In osteoarthritis, we have the problem of advanced glycation end products, and the higher the blood sugar we have, the more sugar there is in the bloodstream available to combine with proteins, and then these AGs, just like we said, stiffen and degrade the cartilage. So the sugar that you eat today is essentially pre-damaging the cushion between your bones for the next 10 years. Number 2, refined starchy carbohydrates. And most people know by now that sugar is not a good thing. But a lot of people still hold on to the idea that carbs are okay, even if they are refined, because they are often told that they are complex, they are starches. So things like white bread, white rice, crackers, and cereal, people still think they are very different from sugar, but in fact, many of these refined starches will have the same or even a higher glycemic index than table sugar, meaning they create more and bigger blood sugar spikes than sugar does. And even if we are only spending a minute on this is one of the most important drivers, not just of metabolic disease, but of osteoarthritis progression, and even in aggravating the problems for rheumatoid. So nothing fancy here, just bread, rice, crackers, and cereal are quietly doing the same thing that cake does. Number 3, sugar-sweetened beverages. And this one deserves its own spot, because of 2 reasons most people do not think about. First, when you take sugar in liquid form, your body does not register it the same way as it does solid food. The satiety signals never fire, so you end up consuming far more total sugar than you ever would if those same calories came in a piece of fruit. Second, the fructose specifically, especially from high fructose corn syrup, is metabolized almost entirely in the liver, and the byproducts of that metabolism include uric acid. An elevated uric acid does not just drive gout, it actively worsens osteoarthritis by depositing crystals in the joint space and by feeding the low-grade chronic inflammation we already talked about. So when I talk to my patients who are dealing with either RA or OA, the single biggest dietary change that almost always moves the needle is removing sugar-sweetened drinks, not just soda, sweet tea, lemonade, energy drinks, the fancy coffee drinks with 10 pumps of syrup. Then we have a group that we call high heat and bad fats. So when we cook food, we also change its properties. And we will start with number 4, industrial seed oils. To really understand what is going on here, we need to look at the fatty acid profile. They are very high in omega-6 fatty acids, and the body breaks them down into arachidonic acid, which drives another signaling molecule called PGE2, stands for prostaglandin E2. Now there are prostaglandin 1, 2, and 3, which are the most common ones. And the 2 is the one that is pro-inflammatory, and this is the main mechanism by which omega-6s are pro-inflammatory in excess. So if we have a balance of omega-6 and omega-3, and we have a balance of those prostaglandin, we have balance. But most people get way too much omega-6, oftentimes 20 or 30 times more than they should, because almost every restaurant, every fast food chain, every packaged food is cooked in soybean oil, canola oil, or corn oil. The second problem is that these polyunsaturated fatty acids have multiple double bonds in them, and these are very, very sensitive to reaction. They are sensitive to break, and when they do, from heat and oxygen, they create byproducts that are toxic, called aldehydes. So when they make these oils at the factory, they expose them to extreme heat and pressure, and they produce a lot of these aldehydes, so they have to clean them up. They taste and smell horrible, and you could not consume them at all, unless they deodorize them, which is another chemical process to remove the aldehydes, and this is why we end up with a completely tasteless and odorless bottle of oil on the grocery store shelf. Now the problem though is that this deodorization process also removes anything else that was natural in there, anything nature put there to protect the oil, things like tocopherols and polyphenols. Those are natural antioxidants that prevent oxidation. So they would have prevented a lot of this damage, but they are removed, So now we end up with two compounding problems. We have the arachidonic acid from the omega-6s that directly drives rheumatoid arthritis flare-ups, but also because they removed anything that was going to protect the oil is essentially defenseless, so as soon as we heat it again at home, it is very easy to oxidize and start creating more aldehydes. Number 5, deep-fried food, which is using the same oil that we just talked about, except now we start heating it to extreme temperatures over and over, often the same oil for many hours. So those multiple double bonds, the polyunsaturated bonds, they are already sensitive to heat and now they break, and we produce more of these toxic aldehydes. And now just like sugar can stick to protein to make an Ag, these aldehydes can stick to protein and make something similar, an ALE. Advanced lipoxidation end product, so a few letters different, but it basically works the same way, it does damage just like the Ags do. So for rheumatoid arthritis we get an increase in inflammation and these rheumatoid flare-ups, and for osteoarthritis we get cartilage damage just like with the Ags, and the worst part is that almost every fried food in a restaurant is fried in one of these unstable oils, heated repeatedly. So a basket of fries is essentially Ags and ALEs pre-made for you before your body even has to do the chemistry. Number 6, heavily charred and smoked meats. And now we get more acronyms. So when we cook meat over very high dry heat, like open flame grilling, charring, smoking, hot pans with high heat searing, we create compounds called HCAs, heterocyclic amines. They form when amino acids and creatine in the meat react at high temperatures, and they can do real damage, but here is the trick most people do not know. If you marinate the meat before cooking it with certain things, you can dramatically offset this. Most of the leafy green herbs like basil, rosemary, thyme, oregano, they are powerful antioxidants, and also something acidic, so vinegar, lemon, lime juice, these are excellent acids, and if you do both of these together you can reduce HCAs by as much as 90%, almost none. Garlic and ginger work as well, so a piece of meat that has been sitting in a lemon garlic herb marinade for 2 hours is going to behave completely differently inside your joints than a piece of meat that was thrown naked onto a dry screaming hot grill. Then there is the second problem, the fat. So if you are grilling a ribeye or a thick steak with lots of fat, and the fat melts and drips into the flame, that creates smoke, and that smoke contains polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, PAHs, and those stick to the outside of the food and you eat them. So what you can do here is trim off the really big pieces of external fat so there is less dripping, and manage the flare-ups, and not to be overly dramatic here, but burnt ends are not your friend if you have arthritis. But before we move on, here is a nuance that matters. There are some people who confuse the issues, and they say red meat is bad because of this cooking chemistry, or they tell us we should never grill anything. And we need to talk about this because it is not as straightforward as some people make it. First of all, there are Ags that are endogenous, meaning made inside the body, and those are the ones we make from blood sugar combining with proteins. So when our blood sugar is high, and we are insulin resistant, they combine to make Ags, and this phenomenon is directly tied to insulin resistance and is proportional to the amount of insulin resistance we have. And then there are exogenous Ags. This is from whatever we bring in through food, from cooking, and from our choice of foods. But here is the thing to realize. Just because you cook it and brown it and put it in your mouth does not mean it ends up in the tissues. The endogenous ones are pretty much guaranteed. They are made inside the system, so they are going to deposit. But when we eat the exogenous ones, only about 10% of them actually get absorbed. And then the research is quite mixed on how much of that absorbed portion actually ends up in the tissues and whether it does damage. So they have done studies where they have dramatically reduced the amount of dietary Ags. They do not grill anything, they do not eat anything that has any Ags in it, but they still were not able to bring down the total amount of Ags in the body significantly. So we need to realize that our level of blood sugar is a much bigger lever in this problem than the grill is, by a wide margin. So if you have a little bit of high blood sugar, that is much worse than eating off the grill every day. I am not saying that you should necessarily eat off the grill every day, but I am also not saying that you should freak out about it. The most important thing you can do is watch your blood sugar first, then worry about cooking methods. Now we have the gut and biome group, and these are all the different ways that food affects our inflammation through gut function. We can get systemic low-grade inflammation through the gut even for osteoarthritis, but most autoimmunity, including rheumatoid arthritis, is also coming from the gut. So number 7 is alcohol. It damages the gut lining directly. It increases intestinal permeability, making it a little bit more leaky. And now what happens is you have some pathogenic bacteria in there. They make byproducts that are toxic, called lipopolysaccharides, LPS. And now when LPS leaks into the bloodstream, the immune system goes crazy. It really does not like that. It sets the body on fire, and you get a systemic immune response to those toxins. So for rheumatoid arthritis, alcohol is a documented flare trigger. It triggers flare-ups more commonly than most other foods, and for osteoarthritis it is going to add to the systemic inflammation load, so we just increase the overall low-grade fire in the body. The threshold matters here too. One glass of red wine a few nights a week is not what we are talking about. We are talking about regular intake above moderate levels. That is what flips the gut permeability problem. Number 8 is gluten, which everyone has heard is a bad thing, and it may or may not be. I am not a fan of gluten for most people with inflammation, but we need to realize it works on a sensitivity mechanism. It will loosen the gut barrier. It will make it more permeable in some people. And if it does that, then larger particles of food can cross into the bloodstream and create allergic sensitivity reactions, and the evidence for this is real, but it is not 100%, because nothing in nutrition science is 100%. Every time we do a study we get slightly different outcomes. With rheumatoid arthritis, gluten can be a flare trigger for some people, and same thing for osteoarthritis, it may add to that inflammatory load. The thing to realize about gluten, though, is that it is not as black and white as with celiacs and non-celiacs. There is a lot of people who have a smaller gray area sensitivity to gluten without actually realizing it. So this is one of those foods where if you think it may be a problem, the answer is simple: cut it out completely for 60 days and see if your joint symptoms shift. If they do, you have your answer. If they do not, then gluten probably was not your driver. Number 9 is nightshades. And these are things like tomatoes, eggplants, peppers, and potatoes, famous nightshades. And for some people this can be a problem because they contain something called lectin, and lectin is essentially the plant defense system. It is a protein that is slightly toxic, and its job is to keep the plant from getting eaten. However, if you have a healthy gut with a strong barrier, with a good mucus layer, and a healthy population of bacteria, the lectins are going to get broken down before they ever reach any of your tissues, before they ever start causing any problems. So in other words, the people who have problems with nightshades and lectins are people who already have a compromised gut, where they do not have the barrier, do not have the mucus, do not have the bacteria, so now the lectin does not get broken down. It starts binding to the gut wall, and again creating reactions and inflammation. So when it comes to a lot of these different foods, especially plant foods, it is more about the health and quality of your biome, of the system down there, than it is about the actual food. So for both RA and OA, if you have a leaky gut and some compromise, then yes, nightshades can lead to reactions, flare-ups, and increased inflammation. So again, give it a try, cut them out for several weeks. If you see a huge difference in your joint symptoms, then you know that was likely contributing, and you can either avoid those foods going forward, or better yet, focus on repairing the gut so you can tolerate them again. Number 10. Ultra-processed additives. And I am grouping together here two categories that show up in the same shelf at the grocery store, and they hit you through the same mechanism: emulsifiers and artificial sweeteners. Things like carboxymethylcellulose, polysorbate 80, saccharin, sucralose, aspartame, and asulfame potassium. They were of course promoted as the healthy smart alternative or the modern convenient alternative. But as we learn more and more, we realize that just about anything that is man-made and intended to alter your food chemistry is going to have a downside. So now we know, especially from research out of institutions studying the microbiome, that both of these classes of additives directly alter the gut microcomposition. They change the balance of bacteria. And they have done multiple studies where they have proven this happens, and even fecal transplant studies now confirm it. They will reduce the protective bacteria that maintain the mucus layer. One key genus that keeps coming up is Akkermansia. And when Akkermansia goes down, the mucus layer thins out, and when the mucus layer thins out, the gut becomes more permeable, and when the gut becomes more permeable, we are right back into the same loop we just talked about with alcohol. LPS leaks into the bloodstream. Inflammation goes systemic. So with rheumatoid arthritis, you will have increased frequency of flare-ups, And with osteoarthritis, it is the same mechanism, but now it just leads to more general low-grade inflammation, and the worst part is that these additives are in virtually everything processed. They help the consistency, they help the blending of the food to be more uniform and smoother, so they are very hard to avoid unless you move to whole food cooking. So here is what I want you to walk away with. The body is not a sealed box that the medical system fixes from the outside. It is a system that is constantly being shaped, moment by what goes into your mouth. And the difference between a person whose arthritis keeps advancing and a person whose arthritis stabilizes or even reverses is almost always a handful of daily decisions about food. You do not need to be perfect. You do not need to fix everything overnight. You need to understand the three clusters: the sugar and refined carb cluster, which is feeding the cytokine storm and the AGs simultaneously, the bad fat and high heat cluster, which is feeding the prostaglandin cascade and the ALE cascade, and the gut and biome cluster, which is feeding the systemic immune response at the level of the gut wall. Address those three clusters and the trajectory of your arthritis changes. That is not theory. That is the pattern I see in the clinic week after week with real patients who come in willing to make the change. And if this was useful, you are going to want to see the companion piece we did on the foods that actively calm down inflammation in both RA and OA, because it is a much shorter list, and you will be surprised by what made it. If you truly want to master your health by understanding how the body actually works, make sure you subscribe, hit that bell, and turn on all the notifications so you never miss another life-saving